guys, I'm sure you remember that Ukraine destroyed the Russian Black Sea Fleet, erased 20% of their oil refining industry, and now NATO borders are 1,000 kilometers longer than they were before Putin started his defensive war. In this video, I have collected the most important failures of Russia during the full-scale war. And all these failures will lead to the collapse of the Russian Federation, so be prepared, and if controlled, this process can actually be beneficial to all of us. But let's discuss each of the Russian mistakes in the military, in the geopolitics, and in the economy to be more prepared to fight against their disinformation, because unfortunately media is still very much Moscow-centered. Many people believed old Cold War stories about the invincible Kremlin when in reality it is a paper tiger. So do share this video with those who doubt, with those who are worried, because it tells a lot about the state of the Russian Federation, their army, and why it's super important to remain determined, to remain united, because now Russia is weakest ever. You know that on this channel we have friendly discussions. Feel free to comment, leaving your ideas. What do you consider the greatest Russian failure during this full-scale invasion of Ukraine? Subscribe to demonstrate your solidarity, and once again share these videos, it helps a lot. So let's start perhaps with the military mistakes and failures, but inside Russia, because in our previous conversation we discussed Russian failures in Ukraine, and here I connect the video if you haven't seen it or you would like to refresh it in your memory. And now let's focus on the Russian Federation, enormously, abnormally big territory with a great potential to dissolve in more democratic states sometime really soon. We can begin, of course, with the failed blitzkrieg, because Putin believed that Ukraine will fall, that people will greet Russian soldiers with flowers. And it's not a joke, it's not lies that many of the Russian soldiers, when crossing the border of Ukraine, committing their first international crime, took their festive uniform for parades because they believed it could take them 3 or 4 days to control all of my country. And they failed tremendously. They failed so much that for Russian propaganda for a couple of weeks it was really difficult to explain what is happening, why Ukraine is so strong, why they underestimated the resilience of Ukrainian people and the strength of our army. So number one, and perhaps one of the greatest failures, is that blitzkrieg, which led to the prolonged, exhausting war. And it is a mistake to think that Ukraine should be exhausted first. It may actually happen to Russia, and we observe it in the sphere of the economy, human resources, but we'll talk about that later in the video. So this failure of blitzkrieg exposed a number of systemic problems inside the Russian government and inside the Russian army. First of all, lack of adequate intelligence. They love worshipping leaders in the Kremlin. Don't repeat that mistake in the United States. They lie to them to make them feel happy and satisfied. And perhaps the information they received from Ukraine was very different from the Ukrainian realities. Together with corruption inside the Russian army, which led to negligence, a lot of things not in the state they should be. So the failed blitzkrieg, and then a lot of problems, retreats and defeats inside Ukraine of the Russian army, exposed their corruption, outdated information, weakness of their intelligence. And by the way, that weakness was beautifully proven by spider web operation. Then Putin brought war back to Russia. During the first year, we were fighting to take back our territory. And please remember this, that the majority of the territories were occupied in 2014, then at the very beginning of the invasion. And after that, we slowly liberate more and more of Ukrainian territories. And this is not an exaggeration. And I don't know why you won't hear a lot about that on the news, on your channels, in different countries of the world. During the last 1,000 days, and 1,000 days, it's like almost 3 years, 2.5. Russian soldiers managed to get 1% of Ukrainian territory, 1% of new Ukrainian territory losing. Can you count the numbers? So they sacrificed hundreds of thousands of their soldiers for the sake of 1% of destroyed Ukrainian villages. This is bad, this is painful, but let's, compare losses and gains, because this is also important. But together with that, war returned back to Russia, exposed another weakness. They do not control their borders. They don't have proper intelligence again. And Ukrainian troops managed to cross borders in Belgorod, in Kursk, and we don't know. Maybe that will repeat again. But apart from that, dozens of Russian regions are an active war zone, with fires and explosions on legitimate military targets there, with air raid alerts working and warning the Russian citizens. They hear explosions, they see smoke, they get the consequences. We'll talk about that when I discuss the economy with you. And Russians bomb their own regions because, once again, of their negligence, corruption in the army. There are cases of bombs dropped or failed air defense. And here we come to another top failure, air defense. They do not have enough air defense. They were not prepared to use it. And it is an important aspect where the size of Russia plays against it. Plus, this is the 21st century war. Many experts, including NATO experts, still measure it according to old standards. But a classical air defense system works differently than it is needed with drone warfare. One more problem and one more misunderstanding that I observe a lot in the conversations of professionals who lack ordinary Ukrainian experience. Subscribe, comment, leave your likes. This matters and helps us debunk this fake image of Russia as an invincible strength, when in reality it is a rotting, dissolving Frankenstein. So dozens of regions as a war zone, broken borders, and now, because our drones often visit these territories to demilitarize arsenals, oil refineries, drone production sites, Russia is a no-fly zone. At least the European part of Russia is a no-fly zone. They have to cancel flights. They have to stop the work of their airports. And that's the reality in Moscow and St. Petersburg, not just on the front lines. And trust me, dozens of thousands of people who have to spend days and nights in the airports realize the consequences of the failed blitzkrieg that brought war back to Russia where it belongs. And trust me, this war will end on the Russian territory. And you don't listen to such updates a lot. I don't know why. Perhaps it is still that Moscow-centric approach which influences a lot of decisions, same as the manipulation with language. That is why I've decided to start new series on this channel, and here I connect the first episode where we discuss the difference between a peace deal, a ceasefire, and a truce. And I act as a language teacher because that's actually my profession. I'm a PhD in linguistics, and I know that words matter, especially if you discuss very important things during very decisive times. So another thing, we destroyed the Russian Black Sea Fleet. It stayed in Ukraine for decades after our renewed independence, and it was a victory to Russia. They could use it, but after they started the war, it was pretty obvious we need to safeguard the waters. We need to deliver food, supplies to our friends in different corners of the world. And the only way to do it was to defeat the Black Sea Fleet, and they had to escape, their headquarters destroyed, lots of their warships on the bottom of the Black Sea, and they had to escape, to retreat to Novorossiysk. That is on the Russian side. That is the greatest geopolitical failure too. And here we actually come to this new section of geopolitics. Let me know in the comments below what are your favorite Russian failures in Russia, because what we talk here about is not just how Ukraine turned out to be stronger than they thought, but how they exposed their problems and weaknesses. Number one, Putin spoke about the need to protect Russia from NATO. We all know that is not true, and if you want to understand better why Ukrainians support NATO and why NATO is not the reason for the attack, watch this video and let me know what do you think. But anyway, even if he wanted to protect Russia from the NATO, the border of Russia and NATO grew tremendously because of Putin's attack on Ukraine. Finland and Sweden, that remained neutral, decided to join the alliance, and congratulations to beautiful people of Sweden and Finland for making this right decision. And Finland borders Russia. And we may say that the border between NATO and Russia doubled, almost doubled, after Finland joined the alliance. So another serious geopolitical failure of Putin. I don't know why people don't speak about that enough. And it also proves that the problem is not NATO. The problem is that when a country in NATO, it makes it problematic for Putin to attack it. But unfortunately, with these constant provocations that he does against Poland with drones, against Romania, against Lithuania, he may believe that NATO is not operating as an alliance anymore. Let me know, would you like a separate discussion on that? Also, former Soviet republics, countries that know what Moscow is, that Kremlin is, who don't want to return back to the monster of the USSR 0 project, they see this weakness of the Kremlin. It is exposed. We know how to understand it. We know how to read it. And that's why Azerbaijan, Armenia, get out of this sphere of influence. Central Asia, that was always under the control of the Kremlin, is out and tends more to China now. They lost their influence in Syria, that was traditionally a pillar for the Russian Navy in the Mediterranean. So this geopolitical influence of Russia vanished. And it's only Donald Trump who keeps speaking about the strengths of Russia, the invincibility of this country. When in reality, we observe this active loss of geopolitical influence. And even in China, Putin acts as a servant, as a totally dependent person. And I honestly believe that after the defeat of Russia, after the natural collapse that has already started, no matter what happens to Ukraine, the Russian Federation will collapse. Part of it will proclaim independence and will remain in the European sphere of influence, maybe, but a lot of countries that will appear will be close with China. You may say that's not what we want, but we don't have a lot of options left because of Putin's actions. It is either all of Russia goes to China, or at least a part of Russia has a chance to become more independent and different from what we witness now. And of course, the economy sums up for the failing Russian economy, because they officially speak about the recession, about the stagnation. And if they speak about that openly on the Russian media, the head of central bank, the head of Ministry of Finances, that is the proof the problems are way worse than they talk about. Because in the Soviet Union, in Russia, they have a tradition of hiding the truth as long as it is possible, as it was with Chernobyl disaster, as it was with the precondition for the collapse of the USSR. And now if they started talking about that, you can multiply their problems by 10. They have Syria's gasoline crisis with shortages of fuel in the country that was once described as a gas station. They have queues, they don't have access, they banned export. Oil refining industry, drone sanctioned, 20% of it destroyed. And Russia is a resource country. They are not competitive on this, scientific IT spheres. They are not competitive. and all they can do is sell their resources. And if they do not refine oil and sell it just as oil, they lose money. And they keep losing this money when they already overused their budget. They planned a blitzkrieg. You remember, we discussed that at the beginning. So they don't have income, the deficit is growing, the economy is in stagnation, they have serious workforce shortages, they don't have, at the moment, when they won't have money to pay to the soldiers, they will be in great trouble, because all of these Russian criminals, they are not ideological soldiers. They are fighting for money and an ability to loot here in Ukraine, unfortunately. And the dissatisfaction is growing in these distant peripheral republics of the Russian Federation, once again with a great potential to become independent one day, because the resources are taken away from there to Moscow and to the front lines, and people feel it. And together with that, I don't believe in good Russians, and we discuss that a lot on the channel. Of course, there are some individual people, but we don't have movements, social, political. They do not unite outside Russia, even in immigration. But the brain drain, it is real. Millions of Russians escaped the conscription. They did not oppose the war. They did not choose to stay and try to change their country, to own their country. They escaped to your countries. But this is a brain drain. These are some IT specialists, some scientists, some businessmen who realize that Russia is a sinking warship, just like Moskva, the one that we destroyed with Ukrainian Neptune missiles. And they are now on this total support from China and even North Korea. So what greatness are you talking about? Russia is an example of failure after failure after failure, and some ignorant people still believed Cold War narratives, more of which, by the way, were also horror stories. Because I believe if a real war happened in that period, the USSR would lose tremendously. So please share these videos. Unfortunately, there are still a lot of people who put Moscow in the center of at least this part of the world and do not look at facts, do not look at the long list of Russian failures, mistakes, exposed weaknesses, and keep speaking of it as, I don't know, the Soviet Union in the 60s, when it's not. Let me know in the comments below, what are your favorite Russian failures? How do you think, which are the most important and will speed up the process of its collapse? Follow me on other social media platforms. You will find them in the description of this video, same as the link to our merch shop with lots of good items that can help you become Ukrainian ambassador and remind people about our fight and the need to defeat Russia. Thank you for buying me coffees, becoming my patrons and sponsors of the channel, but most importantly, thank you for standing with Ukraine. Slava Ukraini!